Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Industrial Appetite Behind Geo Demand Growth in 2024, Will it Counter Oversupply? Thank you all for joining. My name is Irina Peltegova. I'm a Senior Analyst for the Renewable Power team here at Veyt, and I will be your host today. For some housekeeping rules, we will hold a Q&A session at the very end after the presentation, so please write your questions in the Q&A box. Also, please add your name in case we cannot answer your question live. You will make sure we get back to you. Also, you receive a recording of this webinar via email. So in case you need to drop out, you can do that. But of course, I hope you can stay until the end. Right, so let's begin. If you are with us for the first time, let me introduce you to our company. Veyt is a world-leading provider of data-driven insights into low-carbon markets. So we cover renewable power, renewable fuels, and carbon markets. Our team of analysts follows market developments on every continent, so our clients can leverage data-driven insights and strategies to navigate the low-carbon economy and accelerate their climate action. So let's make a start. We're kind of used to talking about the geo market as being very bearish, with the view that this persistent oversupply is never going to end. But could demand recover, and would this recovery be big enough to counter this oversupply over time? Well, we'll try to answer this question today. And here with me, I have my colleagues, Christos Mavrogiannis, who will cover kind of the market side, so the market trends in this session. And then my colleague, Mary Polovtseva, who is our policy analyst, who will then go deeper into the policy sides of the market and how they are shaping the market moves. So on the agenda today, as I mentioned, Chris will cover first, what does the market look like at the moment, where price is at, is geo demand showing some signs of recovery, how does the market balance look like now, as we are now a few months into the new year. There is now also a sign that geo supply is starting to tighten. Chris is also going to present a very exciting demo of a new feature on our platform. So definitely stay tuned for that. And after that, Mary will cover the increasing role of legislative drivers for the geo market. Then she'll focus on specific countries and the industrial appetite for geos in those countries and how they relate to the overall picture. And then we'll end with conclusion and outlook, and of course, the promised Q&A. So I'm giving the floor to Chris.
Thank you, Rena. It's actually important that you know that we are used to seeing a bearish geo market, because basically the prices have been going down since mid 2023, which is around 2 years now that we've been seeing prices mostly going down. I will try to pick up the thread of the story from a bit later, from the beginning of 2024, where we indeed saw a de-escalation of the prices early in the year, and then there was some stabilization in the middle of the year, and then the prices kept going down again. Basically, the reason remains the same. We saw quite a large oversupply in 2023, which was carried forward to the supply of the 2024 disclosure period. And therefore, that's why we keep seeing this pressure in the prices. The prices kept going down below €1, especially for the current year production and even the 2026 vintage. But in the end of January in 2025, we saw some stabilization in the prices. The prices remained stable. There was not much trading activity happening, though we saw lower levels of trading activity there. But there was some stabilization. And then by the end, when we reached the end of April, prices started going down again, mostly because the European Commission announced a slimmer version of the CSRD, which had increased a lot the anticipation for demand growth from 2024 onward. Therefore, since the end of April, we also saw some downward movement, especially in the spot production, and also where the 2025 vintage reached half a euro. And also we saw that there was some pressure applied to the price of the 2026 vintage, which shows that market participants are also not excluding the probability of this oversupply being carried forward to even the 2026 disclosure period. So right now, by the end of the previous week, there was still some bearish sentiment that it was widespread in the market, and to an extent, the talk of the market is that that there's a lot of potential for hydro production in during 2025. And most eyes in the market are looking toward the direction of the Nordics, where the reservoir levels are at record high right now in Norway and in Sweden. It's the case is also this in Iberia, in Spain specifically, but I mean this area is not as an important hydro producer as the Nordics. Therefore, the talk of the market is mostly the reservoir levels in the Nordics. Next slide, please. So let's break it down, the fundamentals one by one, and start with the demand. By the end of the previous week, on Thursday, the AIB released the latest AIB statistics dataset, which includes data reported up until the end of March 2025, when the 2024 disclosure period ended. And the numbers, unfortunately, are not complete. There are some important countries in the dataset that don't have the complete dataset, especially the Netherlands. I will mention here the Netherlands and Austria, where in the Netherlands, the cancellation of renewable GOs is around 35 terawatts, which is almost 50% lower than last year. So the reporting here is definitely not complete. And also in Austria, we see that the data report quite an important decrease in cancellations. But since Austria has a full disclosure, and we saw that there was increase in the electricity consumption in this country, and there was no significant increase in the cancellations of other sort of GOs, like fossil or nuclear, we see here that there are numbers missing. Therefore, we cannot take these numbers as final. The important thing is that Veyt last month, in the beginning of April, when the disclosure period for 2024 ended, collected all the data that are available in the national registries of most countries in the AIB. Specifically, 20 had available statistics right at the end of the 2024 disclosure period. And there we can see the full picture in these countries. We can see, for example, that in the Netherlands, the cancellation increased quite a lot by more than 10 terawatt hours, which is quite an important increase in such an important market as the Netherlands. So what is the overall picture that we saw in the cancellation for the 2024 disclosure period? Again, for the countries that have reported their numbers, we see quite a strong demand increase in some key markets. I will say here the most important one, the strongest increase in the demand was observed in Italy, the Netherlands, Iceland, Finland, Ireland, and Lithuania. In the AIB statistics, we see some strong increase in Greece, but the truth is that there are no reported numbers for the months of 2023 that belong to the 2023 disclosure period. Therefore, it's difficult to conclude what is the final number of cancellation in 2023 in Greece. Therefore, we're not sure if there was an increase or not because of unavailable statistics in this country. But the final cancellation in the 2024 disclosure period was quite an important number. On the other hand, there were some stopping factors in the demand growth in the overall market that we saw in some important markets like Spain and France, where demand basically stagnated. It didn't increase. It just slightly increased or remained on the same level. And then there is Norway, where we observed a total decrease of almost 30 terawatts in this country, which is mostly attributed to the almost the very big decrease of ex-domain cancellations in this country. So from almost 30 terawatts, the ex-domain cancellations dropped to 4 or 5 terawatt hours. And also, of course, there was some slight decrease in the Norwegian demand, in the own domain demand, which means for Norwegian consumers. But Mary will go deeper into this. The important thing to keep here is that this large decrease in the ex-domain cancellations that was seen in Norway, which affects the overall number of the cancellation growth in the AIB, is attributed to the fact that to the loss of British demand from the UK, let's say, from the geo-Brexit. And why is that? Because it was still possible to import EU GOs in the UK via ex-domain cancellations until the end of the 2022 disclosure period in the UK, which ended in July 2023. And since the 2023 disclosure period in Norway, in the AIB, started in April 2023, this means that these cancellations that went to the UK are basically measured in the demand for 2023. That's why the comparison here shows this dramatic decrease, which in reality doesn't really reflect what is the true prospect of own demand in the AIB for renewable GOs. Next slide, please. Yeah, so if we look into the bigger picture of the supply and the demand here for the 2024 disclosure period, we will see that supply grew by 5%, while the demand in the countries, again, I repeat, in the countries that we have available data for, increased by significantly, and considering only the own demand, so that we can, let's say, insulate this decrease that we saw in the ex-domain cancellations in Norway, the own demand in the AIB increased by almost 8.5%, which is quite an important rate by which the demand grew. So we see here that demand growth has outpaced supply growth in 2024, and that to an extent will be carried forward if we see the same, let's say, demand increase in Switzerland and in Germany, where in Switzerland the disclosure period ends in a few days, by the end of May, and in Germany this year will end in July. Therefore, when we have the final numbers for these countries, which of course Germany is quite an important part of the demand, so it will play a very pivotal role in the final picture we get about the demand growth. If Switzerland and Germany follow this, let's say, pattern of demand growth that we observed in the rest of the AIB, which will be 8.5%, let's say, then the overall demand in the AIB could reach 940 terawatt hours, which is way above the demand we saw in the 2023 disclosure period, and it's not really far from the prediction that Veyt made in our annual outlook, which we published a few months ago, where we predicted that the demand for the 2024 disclosure period would land at around 980 terawatt hours, as you can see on the graph that is on this slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as I said before, we are seeing that the growth rate on the supply side is smaller than the growth rate on the demand side, and therefore this is this is basically reducing the rate by which the market balance in the market is growing. What is the market balance? It's basically the accumulated amount of certificates that is still in the market and it's available for use. And we have been seeing that if we see the graph on the slide on the left-hand side, we can see that in 2023, this market balance grew by a lot. And that is the reason why we saw this dramatic drop in prices, right? Now, in the 2024 disclosure period, we see that the rate by which the cumulative balance increases is slowing down significantly compared to what we saw last year. And on the graph on the right-hand side, we can see how the supply and demand, if we also consider how much supply is rolled over to the next year, we can see here that the issuance when compared to the demand and the expiries, and if we exclude the surplus that is rolled over from the previous year, they're pretty much on the same level. So this is the feature for which we're going to give you a brief glimpse of the platform. So next slide, please. Yeah, so as I mentioned, we are seeing that the rate by which the market balance is growing has slowed down significantly, or at least will slow down significantly when the final numbers of the 2024 disclosure period are published, or when we have the final numbers for Germany, right? And now looking into the 2025, into 2025, in Q1 2025, the supply seems to be dropping quite significantly, and this is attributed to the warm winter that we saw in Europe, in most of Europe, which of course led to lower hydro production and lower wind production. So specifically here, we have calculated that in the whole of AIB, excluding Ireland, Iceland, and Switzerland, because of data unavailability for these countries, we see here that the renewable generation compared to last year, to 2023, is already down by almost 60 terawatt hours, which is above 10%, a decrease of above 10%. And this is mostly attributed to lower production in Central and Western Europe, So we are seeing here that the prospect for supply growth in Q1 is actually negative. And that, of course, is normal. It could be considered normal because the hydro production in 2024 was quite exceptional. It was quite an exceptional year when we're looking at it on a hydrological point of view, which means that now that hydro production is coming back to normal, to the normal, let's say, to the normal levels, the average levels, we see that this will have an effect on how much the supply will change in this year compared to last year. This is actually important because, as I said before, a main reason why there's this bearish sentiment in the market is because market participants are looking at the reservoir levels in Norway. And next slide, please. And as we said before, the reservoir levels in Norway are at record high level. But it's important here to see that the reservoir levels are very high. But if we look at the snow, the energy content in the snow that is stored in snow, we see that it's on a record high level only in northern Norway. In southern Norway, actually, these numbers are quite low. Therefore, the hydrological balance in the southern bidding zones of Norway are quite low. Therefore, we don't expect that hydro production in Norway will actually be quite strong. And this is because any production that could be done in northern Norway is difficult to be moved southwards because of the restricted grid. Therefore, supply prospects are looking to be quite. We are expecting that supply could be restricted in 2025. We could see a negative growth here. So now, Irina, I could give a very brief glimpse of the market balance feature that we have developed on our platform, on Veyt's platform. So I could show you. So here, as you can see, we have developed this feature in our medium-term forecast model, where we basically see how much in every year the cumulative balance in the market will change. We see here that in 2024 it was positive, the change, but in 2025 it's going to be negative. This feature is still in production, so these numbers are not reflecting the actual numbers that we're going to populate these graphs with. But the important thing is that the user of the platform can get a glimpse of where we're expecting these numbers to move in the next year. And the important thing here is that we update these features monthly using electricity generation data from ENSO-E. And also we're also feeding geo data in these graphs via the AIB statistics, but also the national registers, which are always closer to real time. So Irina, that was for me, and now I can pass the word to my colleague Mary, who can give you a deeper explanation on why the demand moved like this followed the movement that it followed in each country. Mary?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thank you for your insights. So what we're seeing from the 2024 disclosure cycle data is that policy and regulations are playing an ever-increasing role in the geo market. In 2024, European sustainability reporting rules began to apply and thereby lifted demand for renewable electricity and geos across pretty much all EU member states and AIB domains. At the same time, stated rules compensating for a part of costs under the EU carbon market, the EU ETS, and separately state aid schemes for reduced electricity levies increased demand for geos from the industries. And this is because geos can be used to comply with the scheme requirements to source at least 30% of electricity from renewable sources. In the table on the slide here, I indicated domains where these state aid schemes apply. You'll also see that some countries experience double-digit increase in cancellation numbers. Apart from the CCRD and state aid effects, we can attribute this growth to sustainability requirements from data centers in Europe, which started applying from 2024 onwards. And this is especially the case in Ireland, where the demand reached almost 23 terawatt hours. And now let's move on to the main culprit behind the rise in renewable geo cancellations in the 2024 disclosure period, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. The CCRD-affected companies submitted their first reports in 2025 for the previous financial year. As you can see in the tables here, companies needed to report renewable energy consumption, Scope 2 emissions using both location-based and market-based methods, as well as their greenhouse gas reduction targets. By reviewing the first batch of CCRD reports, close to 100, I noted down some trends. First of all, most companies employ dual reporting for Scope 2 emissions, so there's no more cherry picking whether to use location or market-based method, as it was often done with voluntary reporting under the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. However, when setting future decarbonization targets, Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emission targets are often merged, which is not how it should be done under the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And this merging is most likely because these companies happen to be SBTi members, so Science-Based Targets Initiative members, where such practice is common. However, it is set to change in the near future as SBTi currently revises its corporate standard. And thirdly, most companies use geos for their Scope 2 emission management and actually prefer market-based method to set greenhouse gas reduction targets. So now that we can explain such rise in geo demand in 2024 disclosure cycle, I would also like to bring a future-oriented perspective to our discussion. Just as policy and regulation have an increasing role in the geomarket actors are increasingly attuned to what's happening on the legislative landscape. As a result of the deregulation spree at the European Commission, the sustainability reporting framework is feeling this pressure. As part of the omnibus simplification package, a stop-the-clock mechanism was enforced, which delayed sustainability reporting by 2 years and moved national transposition into law of the due diligence rules to July 2027. So in effect, large companies and listed SMEs would report in 2028 and 2030 accordingly, as displayed on the graph. Lawmakers further suggest that the scope of the affected companies take a slimming pill, Ozempic, so that instead of 50,000 companies, only 10,000 would be covered. It's important to note here that this proposal is yet to be formally adopted, but as an indication, both the Council and the Parliament seem to be aligned on their downsizing view. And on the back of this, we can assume that when the news hit the market in April 2025, the market felt the bearish sentiment, which resulted in downward price correction. And now let's go back to our 2024 disclosure cycle data. Many of you will have noticed that Iceland's geo demand more than tripled. And this development is linked to the CCRD and one company in particular, an aluminium producer, Rio Tinto. Back in 2023, as many of you will recall, the location-based reliance of Icelandic smelters led to double claiming concerns and a short-lived imposition of an export ban. With the application of CCRD that institutes geo reporting, we saw Rio Tinto change its view on the issue so that in 2024, for the first time, the company started buying geos for its electricity consumption at its Icelandic location. And this alone explains the demand growth in Iceland. So now let's travel further to south, to Italy, where geo demand grew by 23%, and where we see that industrials contribute significantly to the increased cancellations. I've previously mentioned the state aid schemes in Italy, and they are applicable there too. Companies can meet eligibility criteria or green conditionality, as it is called there, by proving renewable electricity consumption via GEOs or PPAs. 2024 saw a record number of beneficiaries for state aid for general systems charge discount. More than 5,000 installations applied, as you can see in the graph here. And in 2025, even more companies are going to apply. Still in Italy, but this time in 2025, on the next slide, another scheme is shaping the geo market: energy release for energy-intensive users. The scheme offers 23 terawatt-hours of green electricity and the corresponding geos at a discounted rate of 65 euros per megawatt-hour, while beneficiaries in turn need to commit to building renewable capacities either themselves or through PPA contractors. Over 3,000 companies applied for 70 terawatt-hours, exceeding available volumes by GC. The key question I keep hearing, and that is on everyone's minds, is where GC is going to take these geo volumes from. The answer came recently as GSE confirmed that it will use the geo supply from their auctions. And this has a number of effects for the market. First, by removing 23 terawatt-hours of geos from its regular auctions, GC could reduce volume offering during the market sessions, and this in turn could redirect other market players to procure renewable electricity from traders instead. Second, energy release removes the incentive for industrials to source geos in the short to medium run, so there's no need for them to source those from the OTC market. And third, the scheme has the effect of boosting demand for renewable electricity in Italy in the long run by encouraging renewable project development for self-consumption, resulting in potentially bullish outlook for the PPA market. Our PPA transaction database, which is another product that we offer on our platform, shows that Italy is the second largest PPA market in terms of contracted capacity so far in 2025. And now to finish off our country-specific insights, we're now back in Norway, where Veyt is headquartered and where we're streaming this webinar from. So, as you know, in Norway, there are certain policies that are affecting industries and support location-based reporting too. For instance, Norway has a state aid scheme for a part of EU ETS costs where beneficiaries can be eligible for aid by reporting renewable electricity use through location-based method. So by taking scope 2 emission factors from the grid. And this has the effect of suppressing demand for GEOs in Norway. Combine that with domestic guidelines for CCRD reporting that prioritizes residual mix over GEO procurement, and this explains why Norway saw lower demand levels than in previous years, as pointed out by Chris earlier today. Now I also get a lot of questions, what is actually happening in Norway? Because we are being asked, is Norway staying in the AB market or not? And spoiler here, it is planning to stay, it is not going anywhere. But the government announced plans to further reinforce the use of location-based practice in Norway. Although these changes are a lot less dramatic than what we initially expected. So specifically, Norway plans to develop a guide to Norwegian companies on how to calculate their greenhouse gas emissions, emphasizing that scope 2 emissions are almost 100% emission-free. Second, NVE already changed its product declaration for electricity to also show physically delivered flows to Norway. And lastly, the government will work on international scale to promote location-based reporting. And here I should mention that Norway is not an EU member state and therefore has no say in the shape of EU laws, but Norway has enough wiggle room to promote location-based reporting in voluntary initiatives such as the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the SBTi. And also here I should mention that since Norway is headed for parliamentary elections later this year, so in September 2025, the government's GEO proposal could change should the ruling party setup alter, or should they actually give in to the lobby demands for the GEO market. So that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Chris and Mary, for this insightful presentation. I hope everyone was making, also notes of all the interesting numbers that we reviewed here. So, as like a brief conclusion and outlook on our side, what we see is that policy incentives such as the CSRD, state aid schemes, as Mary mentioned, as well as just generally the low price environment that we've seen for quite a long time, could explain the rising renewable GEO demand in the 2024 disclosure cycle. Cancellation figures for that cycle point to demand recovery, driven primarily by industrial consumers. As Chris explained, we need to wait, of course, until we have the final numbers also for Germany and Switzerland, until we can, have the full picture, but it's looking quite promising in terms of demand growth. At the same time, we're seeing low renewable power production in the beginning of 2025, which is starting to squeeze the supply side. We also saw, yes, there is record high reservoir levels in Norway, but the picture is more nuanced, and we're actually not expecting this record high hydro production in particular that we saw in previous year. So as the market becomes more certain of the demand and the supply balance, as all these numbers become more concrete, we actually expect a GEO price recovery. Of course, that recovery could also be limited by uncertainties driven by this just basically macroeconomic and policy uncertainties, tariff-induced recession, the omnibus package, when and how is it going to be adopted. But as I said, our general view is actually that we should start seeing a price recovery on the market because of all of those reasons and drivers. So yes, one last thing before we start the Q&A session. If you use the QR codes on this slide, you can access two of our most recent analyses that have been made free. But of course, if you want to kind of see everything that we offer, please don't hesitate to reach out to us or just visit Veyt.com in order to see the full spectrum of our products and services. So yes, let's then start with our Q&A session. I'm sure that you had already lots of questions in the Q&A box. All right, one question that we can start with, I guess, Chris. It's related to the market balance. So the question is, you've been showing the market balance graph for multiple times now, and it still doesn't align with your graph on the supply and demand balance. For 2022, you show 854 supply versus 847 demand. But in your market balance development, you indicate a negative of around 30 terawatt hours. Why do those numbers not align?
Yeah, so first of all, as I mentioned before, the numbers on the platform feature are dummy numbers. They're not the final numbers, it's just a feature in production. And when it comes to the graphs that were used in the presentation, for now, our calculations for the market balance are including only ECS GOs. It doesn't include Spanish and Swedish domestic, which is quite an important segment of the market. But this is soon to be integrated as well in our calculations. I understand the question. It's a fair point. But yeah, it's as I said, it's a feature in development, so we're still working on it, but it will be updated soon.
Thank you, Chris. Let's see, another one for you. If you can stay unmuted, would you say it makes sense to attribute 8.5 annual GO demand growth rate to Germany, since it's already the largest GO buyer, particularly with a decreased economic activity? It seems unrealistically optimistic. Can you elaborate on the methodology?
Yeah. So in this case, in the German case, I guess the argument of the audience is that since it's the biggest buyer of GOs, it's not, let's say, realistic to assume this rate of increase. But in reality, if we look into the numbers of other smaller countries, yes, but important consumers, especially if we compare how many renewable GOs they consume and contrast it to the overall electricity consumption in this country. For example, in the Netherlands, we saw quite an important increase, but the Netherlands had already been quite an important consumer of renewable GOs. And besides that, we're also seeing that in Italy, the consumption in Italy last year was already quite high. It was more than 90 terawatt hours, and now it increased above 110 terawatt hours. So yeah, and we are also seeing that the effect of the CSRD it's felt in all, let's say, the domains that we have numbers for. So yes, I think it's not unrealistic. I think it is possible that we could see this growth rate in demand in Germany.
Thank you, Chris. And now,
Irina, sorry, just one last thing to add to that, especially considering that the residual mix in Germany last year had an important segment of fossil, right? So that kind of complements my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for the very thorough answer. Then one question for Mary. What possible consequences do you see for Norway's industry with the location-based reporting?
Yes, that's a very good question, and I get asked this quite a lot. So what it does is that essentially it suppresses the industrial's appetite, potential potential desire for GEOs. Because if you look at the Norwegian state aid scheme for indirect emission costs, it is quite different from the state aid scheme in the way that it is applied in other countries, where there's a very clear requirement to source GEOs to prove renewable electricity consumption. In Norway, they decided to stick to the location-based reporting and basically take advantage of Norwegian natural competitive advantage, which is a lot of renewable power on the grids. And what we did at Veyt, actually, we accessed data from the Norwegian authorities, and we were able to estimate the amount of demand that is potentially falling out of the geo market due to the Norwegian reliance on the location-based method. So for 2024 calendar year, so not disclosure cycle, but calendar year, our estimation landed that as much as 11 terawatt-hours of GEOs are not procured because of this state aid requirement. So that is one aspect of it, the suppressed industrial demand for GEOs. But at the same time, I should say that not everything is as bad as it looks, because we also have CCRD. And when I was reviewing reports from domestic companies in Norway who fell under the scope of CCRD, actually quite a few of them were using GEOs and PPAs. So I would say that the effect is kind of twofold. There's a suppression of geo appetite by the industrials through the state aid scheme, but at the same time, CCRD lifts geo demand, even despite the guidelines to use the residual mix. Corporations are still relying on geos for that purpose. And maybe just to bring a third aspect into this whole thing, in terms of the export ban, is that likely or not? I should mention that the way it worked, at least with Iceland, is that a market participant needs to lodge a complaint against Norway for the EIB to investigate it. And so far, nobody has done it. So if individual registries believe that Norway has a double claiming and double counting problem, of course they can impose an export ban, but so far we have not seen any action, and I do not consider it likely to happen in the future.
Thank you, Mary. There's also another question that I can briefly answer. So will it be possible to send links to the Norwegian legislation on location-based accounting and matching in the chat? It's not going to be possible in the chat, but we have your name, so we're happy to share that via email. So yeah, we can do that. Another question, I guess, for Mary, if you can share, if you know if there's been any progress on Poland joining AIB.
Not that I'm aware of. Unfortunately, I cannot shed more light on this issue.
All right. Okay, another one. Okay, it's a hydro-related question for Chris. Can the increase in hydropower production in northern Norway compensate for the decrease in production in southern Norway, while still resulting in Norway experiencing a net increase not net increase in emissions from guarantees of origin in the market by 2025? I'm assuming they mean increase in cancellations.
Yeah, that's a good question, because indeed the hydrological indicators in Norway are record high, both the reservoir levels and the hydrological balance. But as I mentioned in the presentation, the grid there are grid restrictions when it comes to transmitting power from produced in northern Norway to southern Norway. Therefore, yes, there is large hydro potential in northern Norway, but considering that the demand center in Norway is in the south, most probably, of course, there will be a lot of flows from the north to the south, but the restrictions that the grid pose in that will not allow this production potential to fully materialize. And I also read there are also some reports on the hydrological production in Norway that report that we could see some of the reservoirs actually overfilling, going above 100%. So that means that some of the potential will not be used for production.
Thank you, Chris. And here's a question that I guess I will take. What is your outlook for geo prices in the Balkans amid low hydro levels? Is North Macedonian geo trading launch having impact on prices? That is a very interesting question. I would say it's difficult to say, given that the Balkans, especially the Western Balkans, they're only now kind of starting to establish a geo market. So liquidity is still quite low. There's still some registries in the process of launching trading. Yes, North Macedonia did launch recently. Fundamentally speaking, the impact should be bullish, right? Given the low hydro in the region. But in practice, I think it all will depend on just liquidity and how much activity we're going to start seeing, in exchanging or rather importing, exporting geos within that newly formed hub. All right. If anyone has any more questions, now is the time to share them. I'll give it another couple of minutes.
Maybe I will interject here and say that you have the opportunity to meet me and talk to me on Wednesday in Dessau, Germany at the Open Markets Committee. So feel free to drop by, say hi. I don't bite, so we can have a chat.
A great reminder, because I will also be at an event tomorrow and Thursday in Sofia, Resource Southeast Europe, which will be predominantly focusing on Southeast European renewable markets, PPAs, GOs. So if you happen to be in Sofia, I would love to meet up there. All right, it seems that there are no more questions. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed our presentations. As I mentioned, there is one question still that just came in. Is there any scope for alignment between GOs and REGOs in the future? I don't know. Chris, do you have a view on that?
I guess this question comes from the latest summit conference between the EU and the UK. I don't have any information on that, but I can't give a clear answer. But we could gladly look into this and answer to the person who had I asked the question via email.
Yes, please. If you can just give me your name in the chat, we'll get back to you. We have our colleague Kumar, who is our REGO specialist, and he'll be okay. Oh, sorry, another another question coming in. Okay, Richard, great. We'll get back to you about the REGOs and GO question. Another question just came in. Do you have news about the GO lifetime being shortened in certain countries, and how will the market evolve? Are we talking about shortening to less than, or are we talking about maybe not having the 12-month expiration period, maybe?
I think the question has to do with the fact that in some domains, after the 12-month period has expired, there is still a 6-month window for the holder of the certificate to cancel it. It's no longer possible to export or to export it or move it internationally or transfer it to another account in the registry. But it's still possible to cancel it. So that kind of allows, let's say, facilitates, let's say, this supply carry forward to the next year. If that's the question, there is no movement when it comes to legislation or any policy initiatives that are related to that. But recently, this could be tied to the whole conversation that is happening in the market about promoting annual matching, which would force, let's say, consumers to cancel GOs that were produced in the same year as the disclosure period. We don't have any insights specifically on any policy initiatives on that will be started by the Commission, but this issue is actually raised by a lot of market participants the last few months.
Thank you, Chris. And then yet another question just came in for Mary. What is your view on the outcome of the European Commission report that was presented recently on the effectiveness of the GO system? And do you expect concrete changes to the system based on this consultancy project?
Yes, so I was present in the closed doors webinar that was hosted a couple of weeks ago, where the consortium that was appointed by the European Commission presented their initial results, but the final report will be published this summer. So when it comes to the changes and findings of that report, we actually had the answer from the European Commission representative himself, who confirmed that the market participants are more than welcome to look at the results of the report and take that feedback. But on the side of the European Commission, they're currently not planning any changes to the GEO market, unfortunately.
All right. Perfect. Okay, I'm giving 2 more minutes, and then we're really going to finish this webinar as we are approaching the hour. Any last minute questions? All right, then let's call it a day. Thank you very much for joining us and for your engagement and interesting questions. Thank you also for giving all your contact details in the Q&A box. We will get back to you on the Hydro GO question. I saw quite a few people asking for that. So yeah, once again, thank you for joining. Have a great day, and Mary and I hope to see some of you live in the event next days. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.